With 211 million people, Nigeria is Africa's largest country by both population and economy. Nigeria is also a high-risk country for yellow fever and a big priority for the eye strategy. In just 2 years, between 2017 and 2019, Nigeria had almost 8,000 suspected yellow fever cases and vaccinated over 45 million people against the disease.
Yeah, so, 5 years ago, we realized that, surveillance is not possible without a good lab network. People often think about it just as equipment, but there's a whole food chain around this, from bioengineering to quality assurance, to training, supply chain.
Dr. Chikwe Ihekweazu, former head of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control and now a WHO Assistant Director General, gave us insight into this work and investment back in episode 3 of Eye on Yellow Fever.
It's been a journey, sometimes, incredibly difficult, like pulling teeth.
This time, we revisit Nigeria because its progress is completely central to the success or failure of the eye strategy in its goal to eliminate yellow fever epidemics by 2026.
One disease can wipe out all of the money you've made from other places. Get your people protected, then they can have good health and your economy can boom.
The risk of outbreaks of the deadly disease yellow fever is both significant and growing. This is down to a cocktail of contributing factors, including climate change and increasing pressure on land, greater movement of people, particularly into cities, and a resurgence in our highly connected world of the mosquito species that carries and transmits the disease. Yellow fever may not be the most obvious global public health threat, but it's a disease with no cure and a growing risk that must be taken seriously. We are Eliminate Yellow Fever Epidemics, that's I for short. From the world's most senior public health experts to those on the front line of combating this deadly disease wherever it emerges, we have the inside story on yellow fever's expanding global risk. This is Eye on Yellow Fever. Thanks for being with us. I'm Nika Alexander from the WHO Communications team in Geneva. Our conversation this time is with the president of the Nigerian Academy of Science, a man who has spent decades of his illustrious career thinking about, working on, and responding to disease outbreaks both in Nigeria and wider West Africa.
My name is Oyewale Tomori. I'm from Nigeria. I'm a virologist and a background in veterinary medicine and in virology. I've worked with the university in Nigeria for about 25 years, joined WHO for about 10 years, during which I worked mainly on polio, setting up laboratory network for the African region. But in that interval, being the only virologist, I was also involved with investigating disease outbreaks throughout the African region, from yellow fever to polio to Ebola and other things like that.
So tell us a little bit about Nigeria. Why is it a high-risk country for yellow fever?
It's been a major issue. You probably remember that the Rockefeller Foundation started their work on yellow fever in West Africa at Yaba. Actually, I'm at the site where they actually started their work right now. We're holding a conference at that site, but it's now become the National Institute for Medical Research. So all of the studies on yellow fever were started here. The problem is that I think we have a large population in the country with the vegetation and possibility the vectors are there. In addition to that, we have the monkeys. And I think with the large population, the monkey population and the vectors all combining, add to that there was no mass yellow fever campaign in the country. So the people are vulnerable.
Why do you think, so it's very interesting that you're saying that where yellow fever research began in Nigeria is right where you are now. Why was that site chosen? Do you know?
At the time when they started, West Africa was the major area of the problem. And they had to choose between Ghana, what was Gold Coast at that time, and Lagos. And I think, I guess it was just by chance they chose Yaba. I think because of the larger population of Nigeria at that time, compared to Ghana or Gambia, any of those other countries. The question you're asking now was even asked way back at that time. Why are we having so much of yellow fever in Nigeria? And so we had an interdisciplinary team, a One Health group that went into research in different parts of the country, looking at monkeys, looking at the vectors, and looking at the human population, and seeing the interplay between all these three.
Do you think those three factors are also why from 2017 to 2019 in particular, Nigeria saw some yellow fever outbreaks?
In fact, we can go back to the 1980s, 80 to 92. There was a huge outbreak. And I think it comes seasonally because if you're not doing a mass campaign, you build up population of vulnerable people. And over a period of time, the epidemics come. And so another epidemic came. And in 2017, 2018 was another one. We had all the situations there without mass campaign, with the environmental situation where you had the vectors in big population and the vulnerable people. Once the virus was in circulation, of course, we expect an epidemic to come at any time.
When you talk about mass campaign, do you mean just vaccination or do you mean information as well?
When you're talking about mass campaign, of course, you're looking at getting your population get the vaccine itself. That involves looking at the population and see which are the vulnerable. What we used to do was to look back, when was the last epidemic we had in the country? And you assume that those who were born before that time will have been infected. Those born after would not be infected, and therefore they'd be the vulnerable population.
What's been your personal experience with yellow fever? How has yellow fever impacted you and the people around you?
Because we're the only virus lab in the country for a long time, every epidemic that came out, we were there. Seeing people dying of yellow fever, preventable diseases, children, in secondary school, parents bringing out all they have just to ensure that this child doesn't die. And I know they will die because we did not vaccinate them at time. Two stories in particular amongst many was getting into a village in Nigeria where a young girl, 15-year-old, which the father was doting on this girl and was ready to take whatever amount of money he had, just get me the drug to make sure my daughter doesn't die. But then the daughter died. And being there, you see yourself helpless. The other one was my own colleague, a doctor who trained in the University of Ibadan, who should have gotten the yellow fever vaccine, but got the card. There are a lot of people who do that. They won't get the vaccine, but they go and get a fake card. He had traveled overseas, came back as a tropical medicine expert, got into a place where there was an epidemic going on. And then he got infected himself. He died. And that was really another painful experience.
This is personal for Dr. Tomori, as I guess it must be for every single doctor, nurse, lab technician, or health worker racing to get people protected in a yellow fever hotspot like Nigeria. It's easy to understand why. We shouldn't be losing so many lives to a disease like yellow fever that can be so reliably prevented with a relatively inexpensive single-shot vaccine. This podcast series, Eye on Yellow Fever, is brought to you by the I-Team and Partnership. Today's discussion with Dr. Oyewale Tomori is episode 9 of 10. So if you're just finding out about us for the first time, there is plenty to catch up on in your podcast player. Go back and start from the beginning. And to learn more about the I strategy, our work, our objectives, and the hundreds of organizations from around the world that make up the I Partnership, visit the link in this episode's show notes, or just search online for Eliminate Yellow Fever Epidemics. Back to our focus on Nigeria. The World Health Organization classifies Nigeria as a country that is at high risk of yellow fever for a number of reasons. Immunization coverage in 2020 was at 54%, whereas the threshold for population immunity against outbreaks is 80%. Nigeria has some of the world's largest and fastest growing cities, with a high incidence of poverty and cramped living conditions. We heard in episode 6 how these can lead to catastrophic yellow fever spread. There are also concerns right now about public health resources being diverted from yellow fever campaigns to fight COVID-19. Nigeria is huge, as you were saying, with a population of over 200 million people. There's 250 ethnic groups that speak over 500 languages. How do you address that? How do you make sure you're speaking about how people are sometimes hard to reach? I imagine sometimes the barriers are barriers in communication. Sometimes the barriers are people physically being in a hard to reach area. How do you adjust your strategy to make sure you are reaching everybody who needs to be reached?
You have multiple approaches, different languages, the same message in English to those who understand English, and translated to different languages we have, depending on what area you have. In the northern parts of the country, they speak a different language. In different parts of the south, they also speak different languages. Therefore, you need to translate whatever message you have into the different languages. And one of the other things which has worked very well is that because Nigeria has a kind of traditional society where there's respect for traditional leaders and religious leaders, then they become very potent advocates, in getting people to get vaccinated against yellow fever. So we approach them, we bring them in, make them part of the situation. I think the essence is get your people, the community involved through their leaders who they respect and speak their language.
The process for identifying yellow fever in Nigeria has really sped up over the years. And I suspect some of that has to do with investments in laboratory capacity, which is one of your areas of specialization. Are there other reasons? What are the other reasons that it has become faster to identify when you might be on the cusp of an outbreak?
Way back in the 80s, the lab where I work was actually a WHO reference center. And we did quick and rapid diagnosis. But part of the problem you're having with many of the African countries is that there's too much dependence on donors. There's a need for countries to own this situation, this problem. But now it looks like things are changing and the government is taking interest in the laboratory system. And I'm glad that I also assisted in ensuring that the laboratory in Nigeria gets accredited to be a WHO center that can do proper diagnosis without sending samples out to, say, Dakar or somewhere. That has to be consistently supported by the country. I think that message must be stressed out, not just to Nigeria. Every of those countries should own this as their national assets and use it for the purpose, rather than depending on donors to carry that out. All you need is 2 good or 3 good laboratories where there's accessibility to everybody. The fewer, the better, the one you can maintain, and that's the best solution.
You've spoken a couple times now about how government leaders get distracted, I would assume, by other problems. It's not because they want to drop yellow fever. It's just that another problem becomes bigger and takes their attention instead. How do you keep the focus on yellow fever? How do you convince leaders that this is a good investment because maybe it's not a threat now, but it will become a threat if we don't sustain efforts?
I think the basic foundation of whether yellow fever or any other is good disease surveillance. If you have a good disease surveillance, you can catch up other problems. Investment into laboratories will solve more than just yellow fever problem and create more solutions to their problems. Your solid foundation of disease surveillance takes care of all that. And so we can put the money into our disease surveillance and ensure that, whether yellow fever or Lassa fever, the focus is not lost. So the foundation is good disease surveillance, improved laboratory structure. The same thing we had when COVID came. So I think that's the message to tell the government. Investment in this will have more spill up, which you can make use of.
So the disease surveillance system helped in the COVID-19 response. I imagine the laboratory capacities helped as well. Is there another way in which yellow fever work and experience helped the COVID-19 response?
In fact, very interestingly, most of the immunization we do is mainly for children, the routine immunization. Yellow fever is the only one that goes with the adults. And COVID is more with adults than children. So the experience of having to do mass campaigns in different parts of Nigeria, in different states, amongst adults 15 years and above. And remember, the yellow fever vaccine is by injection. COVID vaccine is by injection, as distinct from the other ones like polio you drop in the mouth. That experience has really helped in the way with COVID, because now these are people who have used the yellow fever vaccine in mass campaign all over the country. So when COVID came, it was a piece of cake.
So the experience in managing the cold chains and managing syringes, having the right health workers who know how to administer a vaccine by injection and so on.
Fantastic.
It's always encouraging to see. I know that our head of emergencies, Dr. Mike Ryan, often says that we underestimate the capacities in African countries at our own peril, because in fact, there's a lot of experience with just as you said, vaccination in large adult populations, whereas in some other countries that don't have the same cycles of disease, they're not used to it. If you're going to give a main message to the people of Nigeria about yellow fever, what would you want them to hear?
Get vaccinated. That first and foremost. I mean, that's the message. Get vaccinated. And that message should go. We're using the same for COVID. Get vaccinated.
Although for COVID, we say get vaccinated, and there's all these other things that are important to do as well to protect yourself. It's a little bit like you said around yellow fever, get vaccinated, but also if you can do mosquito control in your environment and so on. And what about for government? What would be your message for government?
My government, I think the message is that their relevance is in protecting their people. Their relevance is being useful to their people. And part of being useful is protecting them from disease. And that's a major aspect, because if they're not protected from disease, they affect your economy. If your people are dying, your economy also fails. So our governments have this little error about the fact that, health does not reach money. But one thing I always tell them that one disease can wipe out all of the money you've made from other places. That message needs to be clear to our government. I mean, see what COVID is doing to everybody. Get your people protected, then they can have good health and your economy can boom.
So we've asked for your message for the government of Nigeria, for the people in Nigeria. And I think you just gave a message there for anybody listening, basically, right?
Yeah, we're living in a world which we are not alone. The animals are there, mosquitoes are there, different things. So we need to work together. After all, the benefit is for us. So the more vaccines we have, the more we're able to protect ourselves from known diseases and future ones which we don't know, the better for everybody.
The world has a lot to learn from you, from Nigeria, and from experience in other African countries as well. Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Oyewale Tomori.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Professor of Virology, President of the Nigerian Academy of Science, former World Health Organization Africa Region virologist, former Vice Chancellor of Redeemers University. He has authored and co-authored over 130 publications. We couldn't hope for a more prestigious and well-qualified guest on these important issues. Huge thanks again to Dr. Tomori. And thanks, of course, to you for giving your time to us here at the Eye on Yellow Fever podcast. We are back next time with our final episode in the series. The Eye Strategy has committed to end yellow fever epidemics by 2026. We'll be asking what still needs to be done to meet that goal. Please share the Eye on Yellow Fever podcast with friends, colleagues, and family. Word of mouth helps us reach new audiences with these important messages. This episode was produced by Dave Howard with research from Amelia Jansen and sound design by Adam Whaley. I'm Nika Alexander. Eye on Yellow Fever is a Bengo Media production for Eliminate Yellow Fever Epidemics.